Chapter 7 of The Submarine Boys and the Smugglers by Victor G. Durham. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by John Brandon. Chapter 7. Playing Flip-Flop with Danger. In the meantime, the skipper of the Velvet had succeeded in opening the lock on the door. "Stay where you are, Jake," he called in a low voice. "I'll pass the stuff down to you." Jake by now was on the cellar bottom, having hung the lantern on a hook set in a post. From above, the skipper passed the two cases, one after the other, down to Jake, who stood near the foot of the stairs. Having done this much, the skipper, after closing the trap overhead, came down to the cellar bottom. "I reckon we're poor housekeepers, Jake," declared the skipper, speaking in a lower tone than usual. "We'll have to straighten up all the stuff in this cellar, or we can't put much more in. What ails you, man?" This last question was shot out sharply, for a rat had scurried among the boxes in the cellar, making considerable noise. "What have you got that pistol in your hand for?" the skipper went on. "Jake, you're plumb nervous tonight." "I know I am," assented the deckhand. "Ever since we lost that chap overboard, I've been seeing dead men's faces." "Bosh!" cried the skipper angrily. "Put that pistol up, Jake. The way you're handling that thing, you'll shoot me the first thing you know." "I'd shoot my own father tonight if he slipped up behind me and scared me," Jake declared gruffly. "Put that pistol up. You have no business carrying one." "I notice you always carry one, skipper," Jake retorted. "Of course I do, but I'm not nervous," came the dry answer. "I carry a pistol so I can take care of revenue officers or spies of any kind. I don't mean ever to be spied upon or taken alive, but I'm safe with a weapon and you're not. Put that pistol up, I tell you." "Before I do that," Jake insisted, taking down the lantern with his left hand, "I want to search this cellar. I heard a noise." "So did I," jeered the skipper. "But it was a rat, and rats won't hurt men of our kind. Put that pistol up, I tell you, for the last time. If you want to search the cellar, you can do it by putting these piles of cases ship-shape." "Who'll bring up the cases?" Jake asked. "There are 6 more." "True, I had forgotten that," admitted the skipper. "Jake, you can bring up the cases, and I'll straighten things here. If I left you here alone, I'd come back and find you shooting everything in sight full of holes. Don't shoot the schooner up when you get back, but hustle." "I don't want to go down to that schooner alone in the dark," the deckhand insisted, a quiver in his voice. "See here, you idiot," snarled the skipper, grasping the younger man by the throat. "I've had enough of your nonsense. You get back to the schooner and just hustle those cases up here." "If I have any more nonsense out of you, I'll—" The skipper didn't finish. Jake didn't wait for him to, but dropped the lantern and darted up the stairs. "Of all the fools," growled the skipper irritably, "I'd discharge him, but he knows too much about me. Now to see how this stuff here can be set more shipshape. First of all, the forward end of this shore hold." Lantern and skipper were now headed straight for the hiding place of the submarine boys. Worst of all, Jack, in the last peep he thought it wise to take, discovered that the gruff man of the sea was carrying his own revolver in his right hand. In an ambush, if well managed, the submarine boys might succeed in downing this man and disarming him. But that would reveal their presence, which was exactly what Benson did not want to do. At what he judged the proper instant, Jack nudged Hal, who slipped noiselessly over to his right, rounding a tier of boxes. Jack followed stealthily on his chum's heels just as the skipper went around the other side of the tier. Thus far they were safe from discovery, though there could be no telling at what moment a false step might make a noise that must betray them. There was dim light throughout the cellar, though it was, of course, brighter in the near neighborhood of the lantern. "This row of boxes can be shoved back against the end of the cellar," muttered the skipper half aloud, after a short inspection of his surroundings. "I'll start it now." Under cover of this noise, Jack and Hal cautiously slipped down the cellar along its northern side. On account of the dimness of the light, they had to go slowly. Then, too, the greatest care was needed in stopping their slow progress whenever the skipper paused and all was silent. It now looked like an easy matter to get out of the cellar, and doubtless it would have been but for a heavy tread overhead, followed by the appearance of Jake on the stairs. "Boss," he called. "Hello," answered the skipper, pausing in his work. "Where do you want this case?" "Drop it at the foot of the stairs. Wait, I'm coming." Skipper and Light moved down to meet Jake. At this instant Benson and Hastings were within a dozen feet of the foot of the stairs, crouching behind a low tier of boxes. "You've got 5 more cases to get up?" asked the skipper. "Right. Hustle them along. I'll open this one." Hanging the lantern once more on the post hook, the skipper picked up a hammer and cold chisel, soon prying half the lid from the top of the case Jake had just brought. "I can finish this later, though," muttered the skipper half aloud. "It'll be better if I go above and watch Jake. He wouldn't have more sense than to come right in with the big box, even if he met someone on the road at this hour of the night." Feeling to see that his revolver was in his right hand coat pocket, the skipper next ascended the stairs, leaving the lantern on the hook. "It's now, I guess, if ever," breathed Jack in his chum's ear. "But we'll have to be mighty careful not to be seen or heard." As he reached the open box, however, Benson could not resist the temptation to thrust his right hand inside the box. What he brought out was a smaller box. "Havana cigars," he whispered, after studying the label on the box. Then he slipped it under his jacket. "Isn't that almost stealing?" whispered Hal. "Hardly. I'm taking it for evidence. Also for another purpose that I'll explain to you by and by. Now follow me softly up the steps." Jack went up in the lead until his head was almost through the trap. He had barely glanced above him when he heard the skipper turn and come back. There was just time for the submarine boys to slip down the steps on tiptoe. The skipper halted, however, before he came to the trap door. Jake was coming in. "Put the case near the foot of the stairs," the submarine boys heard Redbeard say as they slipped back into their late hiding place a dozen feet away. Down came Jake with his heavy tread. Bump! Sounded the packing case as it landed on the floor. "What are you hanging down there for?" queried the gruff voice of the skipper as Jake lingered for an instant. "Fixing my suspender," grunted Jake. "I'm coming now." As Jake left the shed, the skipper's tread could be heard above, on about the middle of the floor. "If we get out of here," whispered Jack Benson gleefully in his chum's ear. "Yes," mocked Hal. If we do," Jack went on in his chum's ear, "there'll be a box of fine cigars missing down here. Jake lingered, so his skipper will accuse him of having stolen it. That will start suspicion and discord between the greater and lesser rascal." Not until Jake had trudged up with the last case did the skipper follow his deckhand below. "Now that we've got everything up from the boat," said the skipper, "we may as well bring out the straw and sleep here on the floor. When we've had a sleep, there'll be a lot of work to do, and even if I am the owner of this old shed, I don't want the village folks to see you and me going in and coming out of an empty shed in broad daylight. They might wonder what we found to do in a place that everybody around here supposes to be empty. Get out the straw, Jake, and fix it, and we'll have a real sleep for a few hours." As he spoke, the skipper thrust a hand down into the case that he had already opened. "Jake," he inquired, with sudden suspicion, "did your suspender need much fixing?" "Not much," replied the deckhand. "I thought not," leered the skipper. "But there's a box of cigars gone from this case." "I didn't take it," flared up Jake. "I'll talk to you about that after we've had our nap," replied the skipper grimly. Though Jake muttered savagely, both presently lay down on piles of straw just at the foot of the steps. Overhead the trap had been left open a little to give them air. Within 2 minutes, hours of hard work had driven both men into slumber. But the skipper stirred every now and then, like one accustomed to wake on the least alarm. "Going to try it?" asked Hal, knowing the thought uppermost in his chum's mind. "Wait until I take a peep and see," whispered Benson in his chum's nearer ear. As Jack glanced about, the sight did not especially please him. Even though the lantern now burned dimly, the two men lay in such positions that it was going to be ticklish work to step over them and reach the stairs. Besides, each man lay with his revolver gripped in his right hand. "It wouldn't be good for one's health to wake them too suddenly," young Benson muttered dryly to himself. "Going to try it?" insisted whispering Hal. Wait a little and see how wise it looks." Not until 5 minutes later did Jack nudge his chum, then give a nod. "We'll take a chance," whispered Jack. "I'm willing to take one chance at anything," Hal told himself as he pivoted softly on his feet, prepared to follow his leader with the stealth of a cat. End of chapter 7. Recording by John Brandon. Chapter 8 of The Submarine Boys and the Smugglers by Victor G. Durham. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by John Brandon. Chapter 8. Benson tries his hand at humor. Holding their breath, the chums advanced. The distance was short enough, but the danger great. It was not the danger to their own lives that disturbed the submarine boys most. Both knew what a sad blunder it would be to let this pair of rascals discover that their secret was known. For it was not this pair, first of all, that Benson had been set to catch. These men were but the tools of cleverer rascals, who must be caught before any alarm could reach them. A step at a time, Jack moved. A step at the same time Hal Hastings took. Both submarine boys were quivering from the importance of their task and the risk attached to any blunder at the present moment. Benson was about to step over Jake when that worthy turned slightly in his sleep, causing goose flesh to break out all over the young lieutenant, who halted. Presently Jake settled into deeper slumber without having awakened. Nor had the skipper stirred lately, which might be all the more reason for imagining that he would stir very soon. Jake, in partly turning, had withdrawn his hand 3 or 4 inches from the butt of his revolver. Tempted more by mischief than any idea of increasing his own safety, Jack Benson bent over, quickly picking up the weapon. Then, his heart beating faster, he stepped over Jake and placed a foot on the lower step. In another moment he was halfway up the steps. Now he turned to beckon Hal. As Hastings reached him, Benson motioned his chum to pass on up and out ahead of him. The trap door proved to be opened so little, and the danger of opening it more was so apparent, that Hal had a tight squeeze of it in getting through. Once on the floor above, Hastings lay flat, reaching down and taking the pistol from his chum in order to cover Jack's escape in the event of the skipper awakening. After what seemed ages to the two quick-pulsed boys, Jack Benson was through and kneeling on the floor above. "Now for the window, and to get it open," whispered Jack in his chum's ear as he took the revolver again. "I'll stay here and make sure that the skipper doesn't hear something, wake up, and charge through the trap. I think a bullet, even if it goes wild, will cause him to duck below again." Hal presently had the window up, having made no noise sufficient to disturb the sleepers below. He crept quietly out, and Jack, after glancing in that direction, tiptoed over and soon was on the ground outside. "Close the window," Jack directed. "We can't leave it open, or they would at least suspect that someone had been prowling." So Hal closed the window, while Jack Benson slipped Jake's revolver back into his pocket. Then the pair stole swiftly away, for it was well past the coming of daylight, though no one appeared to be astir in the little village. Their course took them directly to the pier at which the Grant's gig usually landed. A single blast on his whistle and a wave of the hand to a sailor on the deck watch was sufficient. Within 3 minutes, a boat's crew was seen to tumble up on deck, then over the side into the gig. The oarsmen bent lustily to their work. Jack and Hal, having hardly spoken, and then only about the freshness of the morning, took their seats in the stern sheets of the gig. Very soon they were on board. They went directly to the miniature wardroom after having locked the outer door of the passageway. "Oh, wow!" exploded the young lieutenant, his dignity flying to the winds for the moment. He rocked back and forth in his seat as he produced the revolver and the box of cigars and laid them on the table. "What's the joke?" asked Hal, smiling. "You're unusually thick, if you don't see," Benson replied, with another chuckle. "You're in just one box of cigars. You don't smoke, and you have a contempt for those who carry firearms when they don't absolutely have to do it. Besides, there are plenty of weapons on board, as this is a war craft. The cigars you can only present to such of the sailors as smoke. Don't you see the point?" "Don't say that you don't," begged Jack Benson, going off into another spasm of laughter. "I didn't mean this as humor, but it has suddenly struck me that it is a rich joke." "I'm in the dark," sighed Hal. "Why, see here, chum. Old Skipper Redbeard missed the box of cigars before he lay down to sleep. He hinted that Jake had stolen them, didn't he? He threatened to take that up with Jake as soon as he awoke. Now, when Jake wakes up, he'll find his pistol gone. The skipper had been roasting him about being too afraid and depending too much on his pistol. What will be Jake's first suspicion? That Skipper Redbeard took it away from him while he was asleep. The skipper is already angry with Jake, and Jake is going to boil over at the skipper. Each will deny the other's accusations. The skipper is a bull-headed fellow, while Jake is sulky by nature. Can you see the royal amount of hard feeling that there will be between them?" Again Jack laughed, this time Hal with him. "That was the only reason why I took Jake's pistol," Jack continued, "just to start internal war in the enemy's camp. Oh, my! I wish I could see and hear the row when it opens." The door from the stateroom passage opened, and Eph Somers bounded in. "What are you fellows making all this racket for?" grumbled Eph. "It has cheated me out of a good hour's sleep." "Mr. Somers," demanded Benson, stiffening, "is this the proper manner in which to enter the presence of your commanding officer?" At attention, sir, replied Ensign Somers, straightening up and saluting. A grin overspread Jack's face, whereupon Eph dropped into his own chair. You've been making purchases on shore, I see, commented Eph, eyeing the cigar box and the pistol. No, replied Hastings gravely. We stole these things. From the enemy, the smugglers, Jack added. Haven't you two been the busy little boys? Commented Ensign Somers. Then you've really seen the smugglers. Have we? Demanded Hal. Jack, tell him about it, and especially the way in which you have divided the smugglers' camp against itself. Eph listened. He began to grin when he heard how the cigars and the pistol came to be on the wardroom table. That'll start a row, all right, between Skipper Redbeard and his man Friday, agreed Eph Somers. I only hope it doesn't turn out to be such a big row that they separate, and then Redbeard doesn't dare smuggle any more smugglings for fear that said Jake will go back on him and denounce him. Jack's face became instantly grave. He whistled. Then gradually his face cleared. No, I don't believe their row will split them, he went on. Both are probably making far more money at this job of theirs than they could make in any other way. So they'll hold together, but each will be more suspicious of the other after this. They won't work in harmony with each other. Like you, Eph, I don't want to see that pair split for the present. Not until they've led us to the really big offenders in this game. How about breakfast? Asked Somers, glancing at his watch. You're in uniform. Hal and I should be. Jack replied, rising. Eph, while we're dressing, will you kindly see the waiter and tell him what we want and that we want it as soon as it can be cooked? While the waiter was passing in and out during the meal, not one of the three boyish young officers mentioned the smugglers. Pistol and cigar box had been locked away in a little cupboard on the wall. But after breakfast, Eph suggested, I wonder if the cigars are really any good. I know some folks to whom we might send them. So do I, replied Benson. To the Secretary of the Navy. Does he smoke? I haven't the least idea, but the cigars will have to go to him as evidence of what we have secured. If they are cigars, suggested Hal mildly. By Jove, you're right about that, laughed Jack, rising and going to the little cupboard. Although it's a cigar box, we really haven't taken the trouble to make sure that it contains cigars. He brought the box out, placing it on the table, and with a knife blade pried the lid up. Cigars all right, nodded Eph. Cigars, yes, Benson admitted, but we don't know that they're all right. The only way to find out, laughed Ensign Somers, would be to try one on a sailor. A sailor is a fine fellow, but no judge of cigars, smiled Benson, as he tapped down the box lid. A sailor will smoke anything, even a piece of tarred rope. And you two had all this fun on shore and never let me in on it, grumbled Eph. There had to be at least one officer on the boat, Benson replied. If you do anything in the matter today, begged Somers, can't you let me have a hand in it? Certainly, promised Jack dryly. Just now I'd be obliged if you would go up on the platform deck and sit under the baby awning there. I want to write a letter. The instant his chums had departed, Lieutenant Jack went over and seated himself by the typewriting machine. Putting on a sheet of official paper, the submarine boy began a lengthy letter to the Secretary of the Navy. In this he stated fully what he had learned to date and suggested very respectfully that if it met the views of the authorities at Washington, Secret Service men might be sent to Boxhaven to trace all express shipments sent out from the shanty. The preparation of this letter took some time. Jack addressed the envelope, then put in the letter sealing it. His next step was to wrap up the cigar box, addressing that also to the Secretary of the Navy. Then he rang for the waiter. My compliments to Mr. Summers and ask him to report. Eph came in, saluting. You wanted a hand in today's doings, Jack hinted. Yes, sir. All right. All we're going to do will be to mail this letter and this package to the Secretary. You may detail a sailor to carry the mail bag for you and see to it that these 2 articles are mailed. Say, isn't that a bit of a messenger boy job for an officer of the Navy? Asked Summers. Not at all. When it is necessary to make sure that these have been mailed, the matter is so important that I don't care to entrust it to any one below an officer's rank. Oh, that's all right then, murmured Eph. But aren't you going to take any other steps, whatever, today? Not before dark. There is nothing that we can really do. Eph found the Grant's mail pouch and secured letter and parcel inside. The pouch he turned over to a sailor to carry. I may as well go ashore in uniform, suggested Eph. That's as you please, nodded Jack. So Eph was pulled shoreward in the gig. Jack, very sleepy, glanced at his watch, discovering that it was now 10 o'clock. What's the use of being commander, officer? He yawned. If I can't send myself to bed until luncheon time. But at that moment Hal Hastings entered, holding out a yellow envelope. A shore boat brought this off, Hastings explained. I signed for it. Tearing open the envelope and glancing at the telegram, he discovered the message to be in the ordinary code of the Navy. Drawing out his code book, pencil and paper, Jack Benson fell to translating, while Hal napped in his chair. Phew, muttered Jack when he had finished and glanced at his translation. What's the matter? Asked Hal, waking up. Just what we had been expecting, Jack replied, pushing the sheet of paper across the table. Hal read these words, bearing also the signature of the Secretary of the Navy. Expense no longer justified by results. Proceed to Norfolk Navy Yard. There report to Department. End of Chapter 8. Recording by John Brandon. Chapter 9 of The Submarine Boys and the Smugglers by Victor G. Durham. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by John Brandon. Chapter 9. Wireless wafts a wail of tragedy. What are you going to do about it? Hal asked, his face paling. What is there for a Navy man to do but obey orders? Jack inquired. What? Just when we are succeeding, let all the credit go to the Secret Service men? Wait a little, smiled Jack, and I'll show you how I'm going to obey orders. Taking up a fresh sheet, he began to write. When he had finished, he picked up the code book, translating his dispatch into the code. Order to Norfolk received. Have just located depot sought and no method of reaching coast. Long letter just mailed. Also sample goods from depot. Will proceed Norfolk if your second wire confirms first, or if ordered. Will wait arrival of men suggested in letter. Signed, Benson, Lieutenant, U.S.N., Commanding. When Jack had finished translating into the code, he passed the original in ordinary English over to Ensign Hal. I guess that will ensure our staying on this assignment for the present, Benson smiled. It would, grunted Hal, if we were working for an ordinary business house. But no one can ever guess which way the Washington cat will jump. I shall be ready for Norfolk until a wire arrives changing orders. Mail matter posted, reported Ensign Summers, coming in and dropping the mail pouch. Good, responded Lieutenant Jack. Now here is a telegram that you may take ashore and send. The messenger boy business is brisk this morning, muttered Eph. You wanted a big hand in all that we're going to do today, Jack smiled. And hurry back, advised Hal. We're about to weigh anchor for Norfolk. What's that? Asked Eph, turning sharply. He heard the news with utter indignation. Ordered back when we've just gotten next to our job? Blurted Ensign Eph Somers. That's what I call all in the line of duty, broke in Lieutenant Benson quietly. If the second wire confirms the first. But the telegram you hold is in line with this, adding the young commander, handing Eph the sheet containing the first draft in ordinary English. We'll go to Norfolk despite that telegram, Hal predicted. Yes, we may as well check our baggage to Norfolk, grunted Somers. Even if we do have to drop the case now, Jack argued, we found the trail for the Secret Service men, and that is more than they were able to do in some months of trying. I'll be 10 minutes late in returning, grunted Eph. I'm going to take the last chance this side of Norfolk of putting 2 ice cream sodas under my uniform belt. Want to come, Hal? Mr. Hastings would be overjoyed, replied Jack, speaking for his other junior, but he is now going forward to inspect the engines. In order to make sure that they're in order for the run to Norfolk, was Ensign Eph's parting growl as he left the wardroom. Mr. Somers, Jack called after him. Sir, responded Eph, returning and saluting. What's your full capacity in the way of ice cream sodas? I don't know, Somers answered. Never worked it out. One day, I remember I put away 18, but I wasn't filled up. Then if you really want more ice cream sodas, I authorize you to remain on shore until the arrival of the department's answer to that wire. Say, that's fine, glowed Eph, and fell to counting his money. Can I lend you any cash? Smiled Jack. Thank you, no. I've $60 left from my last month's pay. If that won't buy all the sodas I can use, at least it'll buy all that I ought to have. 4 minutes later, Eph Somers was once more at the landing pier. 2 hours later, Somers returned bearing a yellow envelope which he handed the young commander. I've had enough ice cream sodas to last halfway to Norfolk, Eph announced. I'll go to station and be ready to get under way. Better wait until I see what the orders are, Jack replied, opening the envelope. Why, it's in ordinary English. All it says is, await further orders at present anchorage. Your dispatch must have given the secretary something to think about, Eph grinned. I'm in hopes the department will let us go through with this matter, was all Benson had to say as he locked the telegram away. Ensign Hal reported the engines in perfect working order. That's as it should be, nodded Jack. A Navy craft's engines should be ready to start on the instant, for one never knows when the call to instant duty may come. Luncheon being served, the young officers had little to do for the afternoon. Jack, in fact, lay on his berth, sound asleep, after the sleepless night, when there came a knock on the door jamb of his stateroom. Pushing back the curtain, Benson saw the gunner's mate with right hand at salute. Mr. Hastings' compliments, sir. And he instructed me to report that a black-looking squall is coming up out of the east. Thank you, mate. I'll be on deck directly. Quickly drawing on his shoes, adjusting his collar and buttoning his uniform blouse, Jack, cap in hand, made for the platform deck. It looks like a live one coming, Hal smiled, pointing seaward. Yes, but I fancy it'll give us very little trouble, Jack replied. This bay is fairly well protected. However, order one of the engine room posts to his station so that we may start speed at once if we break loose from moorings. Very good, sir. Jack remained on deck, standing at first and watching the oncoming weather. It looks like more than a brief squall, ventured Ensign Hal, returning from below. It does indeed, Benson agreed. But you need maintain, besides the engine room, only the usual deck watch. I shall be on deck most of the time. Being still tired, Benson dropped into a deck chair, though he fought against any more napping for the present. Within an hour the storm broke. Even in advance of the arrival of the wind, great white-capped combers could be made out a few miles to the eastward. Then the wind broke loose, coming at first at the rate of 50 miles an hour, but soon increasing to 70. Rain fell for a couple of hours. Even after it ceased, the wind continued, scarcely abating in velocity. At the outburst of the gale, Jack had summoned Hal Hastings. "Run up our aerials and put one of the wireless men at the instrument," he commanded. "Some craft may be in distress, and we want to catch any message that may be flying." Within the bay, the water, though rough, was not so rough but that a shore boat might be operated with safety by a skilled oarsman. Out on the broad Atlantic, however, the waves were running high and with fury. "It'll be a rough time for any sailing vessel too close to shore," Eph remarked, coming upon Jack, who in rain clothes had returned to the deck just before 6 o'clock. "That's why I had the aerial put up," replied Benson, nodding to the jointed, hollow metal pole that had been rigged in place just behind the tower. This jointed metal pole, in 3 sections, could be run up to a total height of 31 feet. On account of the fury of the wind, however, Hal had sent the pole but 25 feet in the air. Even as it was, the gale blew against the aerial pole with such force as to make the little Grant quiver. "Dinner will be ready in 15 minutes," Jack added. "You see how secure our position has been in this little bay. At the height of the gale, even we didn't strain seriously at the moorings cable." "There's a shore boat putting off," reported Eph, approaching his brother officers. "I can't help feeling that it's a telegram for us." The boat came alongside, rowed by 2 men, while a third sat at the tiller. As he came nearer, the helmsman held up a yellow envelope. "Come up close, under our lee side," shouted Benson through a megaphone. "Don't want to scrape your paint," called back the helmsman. "I don't care about the paint," Jack shouted back. "I don't want to see you capsize. Human lives are worth more than paint." So the helmsman obeyed, coming up in the lee, where his boat was safer both from wind and sea. "Sign for us, Mr. Somers," called Jack, as he reached over and received the envelope. Then Benson hurried to the tower, where an electric light burned. "The telegram is from the department, and in English," he added, as his 2 brother officers stepped into the tower to hear the news. "Phew!" he went on breathlessly. "The Brown G. Line steamship 'Cynthia' is in great distress. She has sent in a wireless, which was relayed to Washington. Here are the latitude and longitude given. She's about 200 miles east of here. Propeller shaft broken and sprung a leak. All hands at pumps, but can keep afloat only a few hours longer. 640 human lives on board. First boats launched swamped, with no loss of life, but captain does not dare launch more boats until sea becomes calmer. Boats enough left for only about 250 of those on board, even if boats may be launched safely. Department orders us to hasten to scene at fullest speed. Other craft ordered to the scene, but the department believes we can get there at least 2 hours ahead of any other vessels. We're ordered to save all life possible, Mr. Somers. Here, sir. Lash the gig to deck astern like lightning. Call all hands to help. We may lose the gig, but we want it if we can get through the gale with it. Then order all hands below, after loosing from moorings and getting under way. Take the conning tower watch yourself with the helmsman. Take due east course until order is changed. Mr. Hastings, stand by the engine room watch and see that we get the whole of our 30-mile speed. Mr. Somers, detain the shore boat until my answer to the department is ready." As the two junior officers sprang to obey their orders and the sailors came swarming up through the tower, Benson stepped aside, taking out fountain pen and paper. He sent this dispatch back to the department at Washington. "We start as soon as this wire goes over the side. Hope to reach steamship Cynthia before 1 o'clock in the morning. Will save every life possible." This telegram the young submarine commander handed in person to the messenger from shore. In the meantime, Eph, with the full crew, had hauled the gig on board, overturned it, and was now engaged in lashing it in place, bottom uppermost. The oars and rowlocks were taken below. Within 5 minutes the cast-off was made. As Lieutenant Jack passed through the cabin, he called to the sailor at the wireless instrument. "Operator, try to get some wireless station and report to the Navy Department that the Grant is under way." "Very good, sir." Just as the operator secured the attention of a station up the coast, the throb of the Grant's 2 propeller shafts was felt. Telegram in hand, Jack went into the wardroom, followed by Ensign Hal. Out onto the table the charts were drawn. Working with his instruments, Jack Benson located the exact position given for the Cynthia. Then he determined the course to a nicety and took the result to Eph. "It's going to be a fearful night's work," quivered Ensign Hal when Jack returned to the wardroom. 400 people on that steamship for whom there are no boats. We have a gig that may hold 12 or 15 and can possibly crowd 60 or 70 people on board here. We must see the rest drown if we reach the Cynthia before she goes down." "I shall be heartbroken," replied Lieutenant Jack Benson, compressing his lips grimly, "if we can't perform the impossible and save every human life that is in danger on the Cynthia." End of Chapter 9. Recording by John Brandon. Chapter 10 of The Submarine Boys and the Smugglers by Victor G. Durham. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by John Brandon. Chapter 10. On the Scene of an Ocean Disaster. "How are you going to do that?" asked Hal incredulously. "I don't know," Jack Benson answered, leaning back with a look of stern determination. "I only know that I feel more awake than I ever felt before in my life. And I know, too, that the spirit is surging within me tonight to attempt the impossible without a trace of fear or misgiving. Also, and further, I know that I have 2 as capable brother officers with me as the American Navy contains. Is that answer enough for you?" "It ought to be," Hal Hastings answered, his face glowing, "for I've seen you do the impossible before." "But I can't do it alone," Jack went on. "You and Eph will have to back me tonight, as even you never backed me before. I'll go to the bottom cheerfully, if that will help to save the life of any woman or child on board that doomed steamship," said Hal simply. "I know you will," agreed Jack warmly, grasping his chum's hand. "That's the spirit of the American Navy in all times of stress or danger. But, Hal, going to the bottom in this angry sea won't accomplish anything. You've got to be on your feet, clear-headed and active. Let us see how many we have to depend on. The crew's cook and our cook, the crew's waiter and our waiter. 4 men from whom we can expect nothing, for tonight's work will be out of their line. 3 men on the engine room watch, but they are needed at their station. A gunner's mate and 12 seamen, all of them as fine men as the Navy holds. And 3 officers. 16 of us to do the real work tonight." Jack and Hal remained in the wardroom for the present. No officer or man was allowed on the platform deck, over which huge waves were now rolling. They were not needed in the conning tower, for Ensign F. Summers was there with the helmsman, and Summers could do full duty there. Hal had inspected the engines and had found them running without hitch. Presently, however, Lieutenant Benson climbed to the conning tower. "Have you been using the searchlight, Mr. Summers?" he inquired. "Not after leaving the coast 3 miles behind, sir," Eph answered. "We don't want to wreck ourselves on any other craft by a collision," Jack went on. "Don't be too sparing of the searchlight. I will send up a man to serve it for you." "Very good. Thank you, sir." "It's tough, just waiting and wondering whether we're going to be on time, or whether we're going to arrive too late to rescue those poor souls," quivered Hal, who was strongly sympathetic by nature. "I'm going to do all my worrying and trembling when I reach the spot," laughed Benson shortly. "As there's simply nothing for us to do now, I move that we sit down to dinner." "Dinner?" echoed Hal, almost aghast. "Yes. We may have a mighty wet time of it before we get through. Plenty of nourishment will warm the blood and tend to ward off chill. It's 6:30 now, and we can't reach the 'Cynthia' for more than 6 hours yet, so we may as well fortify ourselves. Come into the wardroom." "Dinner can be served at any moment, sir," announced the mess waiter, meeting the pair of young officers at the doorway of the passage. "Then serve it at once," Jack replied. Though the Grant was staunch and need not fear shipping water, she was rolling and pitching not a little. On the wardroom table, racks had been fastened to keep dishes from sliding to the floor. "I feel guilty to be eating," declared Hal, "when I think of the hundreds of terror-stricken people on the 'Cynthia.'" "We're going to eat," Benson replied simply, "that we may have more strength for the fine work we're praying we may be able to do before daylight." At first Hastings couldn't find his appetite. Gradually, however, he began to eat with more relish. The young lieutenant, however, made a hearty meal from the first. "Now, you'd better go and relieve Eph," Jack advised at the end of the meal. "Eph will want something in his stomach, too." Ensign Summers obeyed the call with alacrity. Through the night the engines continued to do full duty, yet it seemed to Lieutenant Benson that never had he known the hours to drag so slowly. The short reach of the Grant's wireless apparatus worried him, on account of the low height of the aerials. The submarine boat could not send much beyond 30 miles, though she might pick up messages sent from a somewhat greater distance. At 11 o'clock, Benson halted beside the seaman at the instrument. "From now on, operator, send the call 'Cynthia' every 5 minutes until you pick that vessel up." "Very good, sir." Jack took a seat in the crowded cabin, not far from the wireless instrument. Hal, pacing restlessly, at last joined his young commander. The unemployed sailors huddled by themselves. There was little conversation. At 7:30 the operator reported, "I think, sir, that some vessel is trying to reach us." "Can't you make out anything?" demanded Lieutenant Jack, leaping to his feet. "No, sir. You can hear the feeble sound from the instrument." "It must be the 'Cynthia,'" Jack guessed. "Then her dynamo must have given out, and her operator is working from the accumulators, which must be very weak, sir," replied the seaman operator. "Keep on trying," directed Jack Benson tersely. At 11:45 the operator reported, "Here comes the word 'Cynthia,' but it's feebly spelled, sir." "Keep flashing back the answer, then," Jack ordered eagerly, his face breaking out in smiles. "Thank goodness she's still afloat. Tell the Cynthia to send up rockets from now on and to burn Kristin lights for our guidance." "She's still afloat, then," quivered Ensign Hastings joyously as his chum turned. Though he appeared cool, Jack Benson could no longer wait below. He climbed to the conning tower, taking his station beside Eph. By this time the sea was running with much less violence than it had been at the time of their start. There was every evidence that the water would continue to grow calmer. A few minutes after Jack reached the tower, some of the stars began to show. But Benson had no eyes for stars. He was watching for rockets. "There's one, Eph," he cried presently. "I see it," nodded Ensign Somers. "Shall I change the course and go straight for that rocket?" "Of course." From now on they made out a rocket nearly every minute. It was plain sailing as to the course. At last the Kristin lights came into view. In the meantime the wireless man below was trying to keep the ill-fated steamer informed of the Grant's approach. Jack suddenly laid hands on the apparatus controlling the searchlight. This he turned up against the sky, signaling by flashes in the Morse alphabet, "Good cheer. With you in a little while. Coming at full speed." "I can almost hear the poor fellows cheering," smiled Jack Benson, turning to Eph. "Now I'm going below to get into rough service clothes." "Shall I, sir?" inquired Eph Somers. "No, remain at this post until we've done all that is possible yonder." Going below, Jack called on Ensign Hal to follow him and get into rough clothing. But their blouses and uniform caps remained in sight, proclaiming them to be naval officers. "Drop a revolver into your pocket, Hal," Jack called from his stateroom. "I hope we won't have to use any such murderous weapon, though." Then Jack stepped out, followed by his chum. "Gunner's mate," Lieutenant Benson summoned sharply, "pick out the 6 best men at boat handling and arm them all with rifles and 30 rounds in belts. I shall take you and the men for boat's crew if we find the gig fit to launch." Before long, the hull of the Cynthia, a 6,000-ton boat now low in the water, loomed up clearly ahead under the glare of the submarine's searchlight. She was drifting nearly helplessly. A trysail on the foremast supplied the only steerage way that the doomed craft could use. From the bilge pumps came constant streams of water, showing the only means by which the stricken vessel had been kept afloat through the long hours of the night. All this Lieutenant Jack Benson studied by the aid of glass and searchlight as the Grant covered the last 2 or 3 miles of distance lying between the two craft. "Go as close as you can under what lee there is," Benson ordered Ensign Somers. "I shall want to megaphone the captain if possible." Yet it was not wise to go too close. The Cynthia might roll, pitch, and then dive below at any moment. The night had now cleared, and the sea had become almost calm when Lieutenant Jack ordered the after door of the conning tower opened. He stepped outside, followed by the gunner's mate and the 6 sailors. "Don't display your rifles more than you can help, men," Jack called to them. "Leave them in the tower until we see whether the gig may be safely launched. If not, mate, the Cynthia will have to reach us with one of her own boats." Hundreds of white faces could now be made out along the rail of the steamship. The remaining boats hung at the davits. Plainly, the steamship's captain was waiting to confer ere he took any new step. Hal, who had followed his commander, stood by, saying nothing, his breath coming quick and fast. The steamship's electric lights burned feebly, yet they gave some illumination to the scene. Evidently, the fires under the boilers had already been drawn, and the lights were drawing only on the current left in storage batteries. As the submarine began to close in on the other craft, Benson suddenly beheld a surging rush toward one of the lifeboats. Then the flash of revolver fire showed against the night. Though the report did not reach the Navy men, a man dropped before the pistol's fire. One of the ship's Chinese waiters, as the submarine boys afterwards learned. The panic aboard must be fearful when men try to rush the lifeboats with rescue in sight, Jack declared. The poor wretches know that this little craft can't hold them all, Ensign Hal Hastings replied mournfully. End of chapter 10. Recording by John Brandon. Chapter 11 of The Submarine Boys and the Smugglers by Victor G. Durham. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by John Brandon. Chapter 11. Women and Children First. "I think the gig is all right, sir," reported the gunner's mate, saluting. "We have her free, all ready to launch." "Stand by to launch, then," ordered Jack. Eph, in the meantime, was trying to run in close enough for megaphone hailing. "Don't go any closer," Lieutenant Jack ordered at last. Picking up his megaphone, he hailed the foundering steamship. A reply came back, but what it was none on the submarine's deck could make out. "I'll have to give that up," Benson muttered. "We'll have to go alongside in the gig if possible. Gunner's mate, try to launch the gig." This was accomplished, the gig floating in the lee of the Grant, and showing herself to be still seaworthy. The oars were passed up from below, the seamen securing their rifles and taking their places in the boat. "Give way," directed Benson, after he and Hal had taken their places. The gig had never been intended for very rough water. It bobbed about like a cockle shell, even though the sailors bent to the oars and sent her skimming over the water. The hundreds on the Cynthia's deck watched anxiously as Eph turned the searchlight on the gig and the surrounding waters, ever shifting the light as the gig advanced. "That boat will be sunk. It can't live," went up the terror-stricken shout from the watchers on the liner. Many a sea was shipped. It looked as if the gig must founder, for she was not fitted with airtight compartments to keep her afloat when flooded. White-faced but stern, with jaws set and eyes peering straight ahead, the coxswain put all his skill into play. A wave bigger than the others was coming. It seemed certain that the gig would be caught and engulfed. "Give way harder," yelled the coxswain. He turned to watch the wave. Just before it reached them, the coxswain turned the bow of the boat, riding to meet the wave. In another instant the small craft was atop the wave and riding it in brief safety. Another hard spurt of pulling, the coxswain steered the boat in where the hull of the sinking liner would shield it from the worst of the waves for a while. "Splendidly done, Adams," glowed Lieutenant Jack. "Thank you, sir," replied the coxswain, still keeping his eyes on his work. "Boat ahoy!" roared a voice from the promenade deck. "If you can live there a minute, I'll have the side gangway loaded." "Never mind that. Throw us a line, sir. 2 lines," Jack Benson shouted back. Down came a swirling rope aimed for the bow. Gunner's mate Crystal caught it. A second came from the stern. Benson made it his by right of capture. Up he went, hand over hand, along the rope with the agility and sureness of a sailor, while the gunner's mate did the same with the other line. The seamen followed, their rifles slung over their backs. Hal followed Lieutenant Jack. Only the coxswain remained in the boat. It was his to care for. "Where is the captain?" Jack Benson called, as soon as his feet slipped over the rail. "Here," replied a gray-haired man, stepping forward. "Why, your commander sent only a midshipman." "I am the commander of the Grant," Jack replied quietly. "I am Benson, junior lieutenant, U.S. Navy." Why, you look to be only a boy, stammered Captain Drew. Perhaps that's all I am, sir. Jack smiled. This is my second in command, sir, Ensign Hastings. Captain Drew grasped a hand of each, at the same time hurriedly introducing himself. How long do you think you can keep afloat? Benson asked. Not more than 2 or 3 hours, probably, replied Captain Drew. This word was heard by the crowding passengers and passed back through the throng. A wail of panic and terror went up. Then the throng started to surge forward for the lifeboats. Ready, men, Jack called quietly. Unsling your rifles. Open magazines. Load magazines. Close magazines. Now, men, understand me. You will aid Captain Drew and his ship's officers in loading the lifeboats. Remember, women and children first. If you see any man trying to rush a place in any of the boats, shoot him on the spot and without an instant's hesitation. No true man will try to steal a woman's seat in a lifeboat, but some dastardly coward may. And if he does, he deserves to die instantly. That is the law of the sea in time of wreck. Women and children first. If there are seats left, then the men may be provided for. But any man who tries to deprive a weaker being of a seat may be killed remorselessly. No law will punish the slayer. Lieutenant, I thank you for bringing armed men. They're needed, cried Captain Drew, in a voice husky with emotion. We've a good many American and English men on board. They're helping the crew with a hearty goodwill to man the pumps and keep us afloat a little longer. But we've a foreign horde aboard also, some of the scum of the earth, and many of them armed. They've tried to rush the lifeboats already, and that was why I haven't all my boats over the side. My officers have shot down 3 men already for heading rushes. We just killed a Chinaman for that trick before you came alongside. Then Captain Drew gave orders to his mates to lower the boat. A seaman from the Grant went with each mate, stationing himself by a boat, ready to shoot any man who entered a boat without authority. See here, you young jack in uniform, you've no right to keep anyone out of a boat who can get in one, bawled a hoarse-voiced man crowding close. From your speech, you might be an American, hinted Jack coldly. I am, and just as much an American as you are. You've no right to keep me out of a boat. If you claim to be an American, Lieutenant Benson retorted hotly, then you lie. I don't care where you were born. Any real American has at least a boy's share of courage about him. There are men back of me who mean business, stormed the fellow who had insisted that he was an American. If you try to stop us, we'll rush you and throw you overboard. Turning, the fellow called out in some foreign tongue. There was a wild surging forward. Women shrieked as they were trampled on. Benson drew his revolver, Hal doing the same. But Jack switched his pistol into his left hand, leaping forward and felling the self-proclaimed American with a force that nearly broke the rascal's jaw. Understand me, roared Benson. Any fellow who doesn't behave himself like a man won't even be alive to know when this ship goes down. Captain Drew had also drawn his revolver. Gunner's mate Crystal darted in among the crowding wretches, shoving his rifle muzzle in face after face. The cowardly gang gave way with a sullen roar of fear. Women and children forward, shouted Captain Drew. Come just as you are. We'll do no choosing. How many women and children are there on board, sir? Lieutenant Benson asked. 388. You can't get them all in the boats, sir. I know it, confessed Captain Drew. We'll take all we can on the Grant. How many can you take there? Not more than 70, even packing them like sardines. One woman in the crowd did some quick mental arithmetic. You can't save us all, then, she cried, drawing back. I'll give up my chance to some mother with children. Madam, my hat's off, glowed Lieutenant Jack, turning and suiting the action to the word. But every woman and child on board is going to be saved if this ship holds up a little longer. I promise you that. You take your seat in this first boat without hesitation, and I'll send you aboard the Grant, where you'll be dry and have hot coffee. Though the young woman protested, Jack half led, half dragged her to the boat. Step along lively, called Captain Drew, standing by the boat, pistol in hand. First choice to women with children. Mates were loading the other boats. A quartermaster was sent to call men enough away from the pumps to attend to lowering the boats. One after another, the lifeboats were lowered, the tackle cast off, and the boats, short-handed as to oarsmen in order that more women and children might be carried, were pulled away. Now come on, you men, Jack Benson called at the top of his voice. Those of you who know the lingo of any of these foreigners, interpret for me. Bring up all the doors you can. If they stick, break 'em from their hinges. Bring the doors to deck, and I'll show you how we'll get away, if we have luck. Captain Drew, you have a carpenter on board? Yes, and 2 assistants, replied the captain. Send for them on the jump. Tell them to bring 1.5-inch bits and augers. What? Get the carpenters here on the jump, sir, if you please, Jack called as he turned to dart away to oversee the bringing up of doors. Have other men round up all the inch rope you can get. All the boats were away by this time except the gig, which the lonely coxswain was making heroic efforts to keep afloat. This is all right for you, you naval officer, yelled a man hidden in the crowd. When you get tired or scared, you can go back to your craft and be safe. My man, Jack shouted back coldly, I give you my word that I won't seek safety while there's anyone else left on this wreck. That promise brought a cheer from the more manly ones. End of chapter 11. Recording by John Brandon. Chapter 12 of The Submarine Boys and the Smugglers by Victor G. Durham. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by John Brandon. Chapter 12. Jack promises to save himself last. By now the cream of the male passengers, the real men on board, came piling up from below, where they had been at work at the pumps. Captain Drew had sent for them. Jack shouted out his directions for bringing doors on deck. These tired men from the pumps responded with a ready will. Last of all came the remaining members of the crew from the pumps, which were now abandoned. Slam, slam, slam. Doors were being dropped to the deck everywhere. The carpenter and his assistants came running with the bits and augers. Captain, cried Jack, running up, attend to getting your side gangway down. We shall need it. Then he flew back to the carpenters. He instructed them to drill 2 holes in each end of every door. Some of you seamen, come forward with the rope, Lieutenant Benson called. Reeve ropes through these holes. Lash 12 doors to each set, so that the doors will be tied end to end. Rush, for we may have but little time left. As you reeve, make knots, so as to leave a somewhat loose line over the top of each door. These ropes over the tops of the door will do to hold to when the doors are loaded with human beings. As fast as the carpenter or one of his assistants showed signs of weariness, some of these calm-eyed American men who had been below at the pump, took their places with the bits. In a very few moments the first chain of 12 linked and lashed doors was ready. A towing rope was fastened to the foremost one. "Step up lively, men," Lieutenant Jack called. "Shoulder these doors in order, and dump this queer-looking raft over the rail. We'll hold it by the towing line so it won't get away." Ensign Hal and gunner's mate Crystal took the towing line, running with it to the head of the side gangway. Seeing and understanding the move, young Benson waved an arm toward his own armed jackies, who, comprehending, ran also to the head of the gangway, turning the muzzles of their loaded rifles on it. A storm of protest went up, but Jack Benson, recognizing several of the men passengers who had spent so much time at the pumps, rapidly picked them out, pressing them forward and passing them through the line of rifles. "Pass down quickly, gentlemen," Jack begged. "We want to rush each raft away." Each door in the chain held an average of 3 men, who were obliged to kneel and hold on to the ropes provided. Their weight was likely to be enough to hold the doors right side up. "Let the gig get in there," Lieutenant Benson shouted down over the water. "Captain Drew, I'll have to ask you to furnish 6 oarsmen from your crew to work the gig." The sailors were quickly in place, going down over the side by the line up which Lieutenant Benson had climbed. They brought the gig around to the head of the raft, taking the tow line aboard. Mate Crystal made fast another line for hauling the doors of the raft past the side gangway. "Don't fill that raft up with men," begged one American passenger, crowding forward. "Lieutenant, don't you know that there are still women and children standing back there, mute and patient?" "Yes," Benson nodded. "I'm thinking of their safety. If anything happens to this first raft, I want to profit by experience and make the next ones more secure. Fall to lively there. Bore, bore, bore. Reeve the ropes through. We want the next raft ready in half the time it took to make the first one." Hal now took his stand by the men who were fitting the rafts together out of stateroom and other doors. Jack had time to step to the rail, mopping his brow and letting the breeze blow on his face. As he stood there, he saw the gig crawl out to the Grant, aboard which the line was made fast. Ensign F. Summers and a Jackie on board the Grant had crawled astern over the uncertain footing of the deck beyond the platform deck. There they received the line and made it fast. Once more the searchlight of the submarine played over the doomed Cynthia. As soon as the first raft had been filled, Jack himself waved the go-ahead signal. Slowly the Grant pulled away, drawing after it the string of doors with men still clinging desperately. His heart in his mouth, young Benson keenly watched the outcome. But none of the doors was overturned by the waves. Though the crouching men were all drenched to the skin, they managed to hold on for their lives. "Another raft ready," called a voice. "Clear the way and we'll drop it overboard." "Back for a few moments," called Lieutenant Benson, turning and waving them away. "Here come 2 of the lifeboats, which have transferred the women and children to the submarine. Bring the rest of the women and children forward. Let them pass down the side gangway to the boats as they come alongside. Some of you strong-armed men assist them down. But remember that any man who takes a seat in either boat will be shot by my men for his trouble." Several of the selfish males who had crowded forward to aid the women and children down the gangway dropped back on hearing that. There were plenty of American men passengers, however, to volunteer, who would not be cowardly enough to try to steal prompt safety for themselves. The 2 returning lifeboats were speedily filled. But there was still a pathetic group of women left behind. All women who had children had finally passed to boats. Those who had no children, and who had not yet left, acted with as much courage as did any of the men. Jack watched until the lifeboats had pulled clear. "Now tumble over that raft," he called, "and get others ready as quickly as you can. Gunner's mate, see that there is no crowding or fighting. Remember what your men have rifles for." By this time, even those who would have stolen safety, had they dared, were wholly convinced that it would mean only swift death at the hands of these stern-eyed men of Uncle Sam's Navy. So they held back, waiting to be called when Lieutenant Jack Benson deemed that their turn had come. Overboard went the second raft. Men passed down swiftly, but in order, to take their places on the doors. The tow line was thrown to the gig, which hovered nearby. This line was carried out and made fast to the rear end of the first raft. A third and fourth raft were quickly ready. Now all hands, even the most selfish and worthless of the male self-seekers aboard, were working with a will. At the addition of each raft to her string, the Grant moved a little further away. "Lieutenant, you're doing magnificent work," murmured Captain Drew in Benson's ear. "It couldn't be better." "We've got the last of the women and children off anyway, sir," Lieutenant Jack replied. "It's been a fearful night for me." "I can believe that well enough, sir." "I've been proud of my fellow Englishmen," continued Captain Drew. "They've behaved like men, every one of them." "I trust, sir, you can say as much for your American men passengers." "I didn't think it necessary to speak of the grit of the Americans aboard," replied the Englishman simply. "In our country we take the invariable grit of an American for granted." While the fifth raft was being filled, the Cynthia's deck began suddenly to slope forward at an alarming degree of pitch. "She's sinking by the bow!" went up the frenzied shout in many tongues. Then, seemingly losing all control of themselves, the more cowardly ones rushed the little group of Jackies. "Shoot fast, if you have to, men!" shouted Lieutenant Benson. For only another moment did the frenzied crowd seem defiant. Then slowly they gave back. "That's all right for you, Lieutenant," rose a voice. "At the last moment you'll save your skin and leave a lot of us to go to the bottom." "The scoundrel who says that lies," flashed Lieutenant Jack Benson. "I have already promised to save myself last." End of chapter 12. Recording by John Brandon. Chapter 13 of The Submarine Boys and the Smugglers by Victor G. Durham. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by John Brandon. Chapter 13. A glorious bit of work. The forward settling of the Cynthia continued alarmingly. "Don't you think, Lieutenant, we'd better throw the remaining doors overboard without roping and pass the call, every man for himself?" "No, sir," the submarine boy answered promptly. "But our bow may go under at any moment now." "Yes, sir. But if we throw the unlashed doors overboard and tell the men to jump, a lot will be drowned." "We'd better take a chance of saving more." "Very well," said the English sea captain. "You haven't lost a ship tonight." "I have, or am about to. Your head is clearer than mine, Lieutenant." Hal was rushing the men who were building the rafts. Yet he saw to it that none of the roping work was slighted. A flaw anywhere in the roping might yet cause great loss of life. This Hastings shouted to the workers as he encouraged them to greater speed. 3 more rafts were quickly over. Then others followed. Now the decks were being rapidly cleared. As the last string of lashed doors was moved into place, there remained only 3 passengers: Captain Drew, his first officer, and the submarine boy's own naval party. The gig was already carrying the tow line. All passed down in orderly fashion until only Benson and Captain Drew remained at the head of the gangway. "Come, sir, and please be quick," urged Jack, resting a hand on the old sailing master's arm. "A British captain goes down with his ship," replied Captain Drew sadly. "Here's one who doesn't," scoffed Jack, tightening his hold. "Come, sir, don't delay us. Everyone else is off the ship." "I'm going to follow the tradition and sink with my ship," insisted Captain Drew. "Goodbye, Lieutenant, and thank you for the magnificent work you've done here tonight." "You're coming down with me, sir," Jack insisted. If you don't start down this instant, I shall recall 4 of my men to seize you and hustle you down to safety." The English sailing master saw that his young American friend meant every word of it. "At least, Lieutenant, precede me," he begged. "I should be the last to leave my ship." "I'll grant you that, sir, at the bottom of the gangway, if you'll precede me down to the water." "Hurry!" cried Ensign Hal stoutly. "If you don't, we shall be drawn down by the suction when the ship goes under. She's settling like a ton of lead. Hurry, or we can't get away." "Come, sir," Lieutenant Benson insisted. "Don't imperil others." Captain Drew, like one in a trance, yielded to this insistence. He went down the steps in a daze. True to his promise, Jack passed by him at the foot, stepping to a door. "Come now, Captain," he insisted sharply. "Your promise. Don't put others in peril." Captain Drew obeyed, stepping onto a door, sinking to his knees and gripping at a line. Jack was beside him, keeping a sharp lookout that this man did not yield to the impulse to roll overboard and go down with his doomed ship. The signal was passed ahead, and the Grant pulled onward. It was fearfully slow work, for the Grant was towing a drag for which she had never been intended. While they were getting away, the gig moved to a point in the line of rafts, taking off 8 women, all the added passengers that the light gig could hold with safety. "There she goes!" cried a voice. A babel instantly arose. By this time the hindmost end of the chain of rafts was some 500 feet from the wreck. With a great sob, Captain Drew turned for a last look at his ship. Jack Benson watched him hawk-like. The Cynthia's bow went under, though her raising stern was still afloat. How that wreck seemed to hesitate about taking the final plunge to Davy Jones' locker. Captain Drew was sobbing broken-heartedly. "It's tough, sir," Jack murmured sympathetically in his ear. "But your record is clear, sir. You haven't left a soul aboard." "Except the 3 who were shot for rushing the boats," quavered the Englishman. "I don't believe such fellows as they ever had souls," Jack Benson retorted bluntly. "Any man may be scared, but no man has a right to make a despicable coward of himself just because he's scared." Higher rose the stern of the steamship as the big hull settled slowly forward. Rudder and propellers were now entirely out of the water. "Let me drop overboard and go down at the same time," murmured Captain Drew brokenly. "Don't try to stop me." "Get on the other side of him and watch," muttered Benson to one of his jack-tars. With a grim smile, the naval seaman passed behind the Englishman, produced a short length of rope, and with it lashed Captain Drew's right foot fast to the door. That would hold him where he was until ready hands could interfere with any mistaken attempt at suicide. It was well toward daybreak when Jack had stepped to the raft ahead of Captain Drew. Shortly after they had drifted away from the doomed ship, the Cynthia plunged on her final dive and went below the surface of the waters. The low-running waves washed over and seemed to blot the liner out of existence all in a moment. Soon after, day began to break. At 5 o'clock it was broad daylight. About this time, the wireless operator on the Grant picked up a message from Commander Breen, in charge of the United States scout cruiser Wyandotte. Instantly the call was answered, but nothing further was heard from the Wyandotte for 10 minutes. When the former call was repeated, "The cruiser can't pick up our answer yet," Eph remarked as he stood over the operator in the cabin. "Our aerial hasn't height enough to carry the wave to his spark." A few minutes later, however, the Wyandotte joyously followed up the Grant's answer, received for the first time. Those signals had been exchanged every few minutes. "You're the Grant," came from the cruiser. "Yes," Eph's operator answered back. "Where are you?" Eph gave the exact position, signing his own name and his rank as ensign. Swift as thought came back the query, "Where's Benson?" "Out on a raft with rescued passengers," Eph directed his operator to send back. "How many did you rescue from the Cynthia?" the cruiser wanted to know. "All passengers, officers, and crew, except 3 men shot down for trying to rush lifeboats ahead of women and children," flashed Summers' answer. "All saved?" "Yes, sir." "Grand work. The Navy has a right to be proud of you youngsters," came the congratulatory message, this time signed by Commander Breen. After a pause, the scout cruiser sent this query: "Is the Cynthia afloat yet?" "No. Sank just before dawn this morning." "What time did you reach her?" "About 1 o'clock." "Grand work," came again from Commander Breen. "Thank you, sir." Eph's wireless man sent back: "Are you in distress?" "No, but we can't keep up more than headway. Many passengers and others are on rafts that we're towing. Don't care how soon you overtake us." "Coming with all speed," flashed the Wyandotte. "Will you relay our news to shore?" requested Ensign Eph. "At once. So goodbye for a few minutes." 10 minutes passed ere the Grant was signaled again, though the submarine's present commander heard all that was being flashed through space to Washington. "This is Wyandotte," came after 15 minutes. "Grant?" "Grant," the submarine's wireless sent back. "Sir?" "Navy Department. Delighted with news which adds new laurels to the American Navy. Department sends congratulations to officers and crew of Grant." "Will you assure Department of our thanks?" Eph requested. "With great pleasure." After that, the two craft of the Navy conversed only as to location of the submarine and her numerous convoy. End of chapter 13. Recording by John Brandon. Chapter 14 of The Submarine Boys and the Smugglers by Victor G. Durham. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by John Brandon. Chapter 14. Winning the President's Thanks. Though all possible ventilation had been provided, it was still suffocatingly hot in the Grant's small cabin. Little wonder, for more than 70 women and children were packed in there. There were seats for hardly more than half of these rescued passengers. As soon as possible, Ensign Eph escaped to the conning tower, where there was an abundance of fresh air. At 5 minutes past 6, the foremast of the approaching scout cruiser was sighted from the Grant. 20 minutes later, the cruiser, coming on under full steam, was plainly visible to the hundreds who eagerly awaited her coming. Nor was it long after when the Wyandotte, with shrill blasts from her whistle, came close and lay to on the now quiet sea. 8 boats, finely manned by jackies, were at once lowered, and the work of transferring the rescued ones from the rafts in tow of the Grant rapidly proceeded. The Cynthia's remaining lifeboats at once rowed to the cruiser. When the last passenger had been taken from the rafts, and these doors cut apart and cast loose, 2 lifeboats went over to the submarine and took off the women and children there. All were finally landed on the Wyandotte without mishap. Jack and Hal, with their enlisted men, were also taken back to the Grant as soon as the passengers had departed. The gig was being hoisted into place when a seaman standing on the bridge of the Wyandotte signaled, "Commander Breen's compliments. Breakfast is ready. Will Mr. Benson join Commander Breen?" "There's nothing to do but obey," laughed Jack as he read the message. So he stepped into the gig and was rowed over to the scout cruiser. As soon as he had gone on board, the gig returned to the Grant, next being hoisted and lashed into place. Commander Breen had also invited Captain Drew to join him at breakfast. "There's Benson, the brick of our Navy," shouted one American man as soon as he espied Jack on deck. "3 cheers for him, and a string of rousing tigers." Laughing, yet flushing too, Jack fairly fled to Commander Breen's quarters. Captain Drew, though present at the meal, could eat but little. At times he talked rapidly, at others he appeared all but tongue-tied. Every now and then tears glistened in his eyes. Both the scout cruiser and the submarine were now forging ahead once more. For the present their courses would lie together, though presently the Wyandotte would take a more northerly course for New York City. "I've heard much of you, Mr. Benson," said Commander Breen, after the meal had begun. "I've always wished to meet you, and now my first chance has been on a day when you have performed a wonderful piece of work on the ocean." "I hope you won't continue to think it wonderful," smiled Jack. After that the conversation was almost wholly with Captain Drew. Both the elder and the younger naval officers tried to cheer up the old sailing master, but this they found a difficult matter. They learned, however, that Captain Drew did not intend seeking the command of another ship. He had money enough saved and intended to return to England and there live quietly, the sea henceforth to be but a memory to him. When breakfast was over, an hour later, Jack Benson did not linger. It was time for the 2 craft to part company. The Wyandotte now signaled the Grant, and both craft lay to, while the gig rode the waves and came alongside for the young lieutenant. "Good boy! Fine fellow! He did wonderful work for us last night. We'll never forget Lieutenant Benson." These were only a few of the comments that Jack heard as, with lifted cap, he passed through the throngs of the rescued on the scout cruiser's deck and made his way to the side gangway. "Now then," proposed a hearty voice, "cheer Lieutenant Benson out of sight. We owe our lives to him, his officers, and his men. Let loose, everybody." This came just as the coxswain had given orders to pull away. The tumult that followed was deafening. Women's voices could be heard with those of the men. Children joined in. All along the rail of the cruiser's spar deck handkerchiefs were fluttering, handkerchiefs that not many hours before had been drenched with tears of hopeless terror. As the gig was hauled up in place and lashed, the powerful steam whistle of the Wyandotte started a new tumult. "Mr. Hastings, see that our colors are dipped at once in acknowledgment," Jack ordered. "Then ahead at full speed for Boxhaven." Jack vanished down the stairs leading from the conning tower. He enjoyed doing his duty. The more perilous the duty, the better he liked it. but being tossed up in a blanket of approval and praise did not please him. "Why didn't you stay on deck?" questioned Eph Somers, who had followed him below. "You should have waved your hat for the next 10 minutes. The people you rescued last night know a hero when they see one, and you've cheated them out of a lot of enjoyment by running away." "The word hero," muttered Lieutenant Benson, "is one that should be erased from the service dictionary. No officer or man in the Army or Navy has any right to be a hero. Whenever a service man has any duty to perform, he should put it through to the very best of his ability, and should sidestep at the taunt of being a hero. Mr. Somers, you're just about down and out." "Oh, there's a lot of kick left in me yet," Eph replied with a grin. "You will turn in for 2 hours," Jack directed. "I will take personal command. I shall also send Hal to his berth. You, Mr. Somers, will call Mr. Hastings to relieve you when you have been on duty 2 hours. That will give Hal 4 hours of sleep. He needs it, poor fellow, for he wore himself out giving the rafts his personal attention and speeding the work all he could." Jack, as soon as his own deck watch was over, tumbled into his berth. He fell asleep at once, nor was Benson aroused until Eph Somers came in to report. "Sir, we are within about 5 miles of Boxhaven Bay. Have you any orders, sir?" "If I have," smiled Benson, "I'll go on deck and give them." It was shortly after 3 o'clock in the afternoon when the Grant returned to her former moorings. The gig was placed back in the water, ready for instant use. While this was being done, a shore boat came out. The man in charge brought 2 telegrams. "One came before 10 this morning, the other at 11 o'clock," said the messenger. "Any answer to go ashore?" The first envelope that the submarine boy opened bore the signature of the Secretary of the Navy. The sender stated that, by direction of the President, he begged to tender heartiest thanks and sincere congratulations to officers and men of the Grant for their splendid work performed at the wreck of the Cynthia. "It was not the expectation of this department," the dispatch ran on, "that you would be able to accomplish more than to take off a few score of women and children who would not otherwise be rescued. It was believed that the commander of the Wyandotte would accomplish the major part of the work if the Cynthia should be fortunate enough to keep afloat a few hours longer than she actually did. The exploits of the officers and crew of the Grant will fill a bright page indeed in the more peaceful annals of the United States Navy. You have all merited and won the applause of the nation." "Gunner's mate," shouted Jack Benson lustily, "pipe all hands on deck to listen to a communication." While the men were tumbling up, Jack read the second telegram. His eyes flashed as he placed this second message in an inner pocket. Then he turned to face all hands, reading aloud the communication of the Secretary of the Navy to the entire personnel of the submarine. "We are grateful to the Department, as well as to the President, for this expression of esteem for us," the young submarine commander went on smilingly. "Still, we who were on the spot know, better than any one else can possibly know, that we merely performed a simple duty to the best of our united powers. I wish to thank you all, officers and men, for the splendid discipline and fidelity which made our task so easy." Having dismissed the crew, Jack quietly signaled Hal and Eph to follow him to the wardroom. Hardly had they entered this cozy, snug little place when a brisk step was heard. Ned White entered, his face ablaze with reproach. End of chapter 14. Recording by John Brandon. Chapter 15 of The Submarine Boys and the Smugglers by Victor G. Durham. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by John Brandon. Chapter 15. Ned's Get-Rich-Quickly Scheme. "Well, you're some nice fellow." "What?" blurted Ned, surveying the three assembled young officers. "What have we done now?" inquired Jack Benson, looking up. "Done?" repeated Ned White disgustedly. "You went away on one of the finest and most picturesque of sea rescues with never a word to me, not an offer to take me along or let me see what was happening." "There were several reasons why we didn't," Jack declared. "In the first place, when we received that order from the Navy Department, there was no time to go hunting up folks on shore. We slipped our cable and started the engines as fast as we could move. In the second place, I have not been authorized to take you on a cruise of any kind." "You haven't?" Ned demanded, opening his eyes still wider. "Why, I heard from the department yesterday afternoon. Friends of mine in Washington attended to that. Here's the telegram." "We haven't yet heard from the department," Jack insisted, handing back the telegram. "Then have I got to go back on shore?" White demanded. "I've come out and brought 2 bags with me. One of your sailors has them outside the door now. There's no regulation against our having an extra bag or 2 on board." Benson smiled. "And unless we receive sailing orders, you'll be very welcome, Mr. White, until into the evening. We may have guests when docked or at anchorage." "But I don't understand. You're not getting the order from the Navy Department," Ned went on anxiously. "I'll go ashore to the telegraph office and inquire." "That won't be necessary. I'll send the coxswain of the gig." But at that moment the gunner's mate knocked at the door, then handed in a telegram. "Here is the official order," said Jack, after glancing at the telegram. "This authorizes me, at my pleasure and discretion, to have you on board at any or all times during the next 30 days as my guest. The telegram is marked delayed in sending, for it is dated yesterday. Probably the Cynthia matter drove it all out of the head of some clerk in the department." "Well, what's your pleasure?" demanded Ned White. "You know well enough that you're welcome on board," Jack answered, gripping his guest's hand. Hal and Eph went through the same formality. "Then I may have your man bring in the bags?" asked Ned. "Mr. Somers will give the order. You will have the after stateroom on the port side." "That's the stateroom nearest to the wardroom table," chuckled Ned gleefully. He went out for a moment to attend to the disposition of his bags. Having opened his baggage, he presently came back with a good-sized bank, which he placed on the wardroom table. "Here's something that I want to show you fellows," Ned went on. "It's quite an idea, I think. The scheme may help you all out if you feel any need of putting by savings." "Do you have to save?" inquired Jack. "You, with wealthy parents and a good income outside of your government pay in the State Department?" "It's a bore to save," Ned confessed. "To me, money seems made only to spend. But my father has been kicking at my expenses for some time, and has given me several lectures on the art of saving. There's a fellow named Jones in the State Department who hasn't a cent in the world outside of his beggary pay, yet somehow he always has money. In fact, I found it convenient to borrow from him more than once. So one day Jones and I were chatting, and I told him about my father's peculiar notion that I ought to save money. Odd, but Jones didn't think my father's idea was anything very peculiar." "I'm surprised at Jones' lack of sense," murmured Ensign Eph. "Oh, Jones is quite a bright fellow in a lot of ways," Ned went on genially. "He even said that he thought my father was right, and that I ought to go in for saving. He told me that I needn't start with very heavy saving. I told him that was cheering. Jones said that sometimes pretty big results come out of small beginnings, and I assured him that I could see the truth of that in a general way. Then he asked me if I would be willing to make a start by saving pennies. I told him that didn't seem very difficult, as I always hated to have them in my pockets. Then Jones outlined the scheme. and it was a dandy in its way, though I don't know that the outcome will be very big. Producing a key, White opened his bank by taking off the top, allowing the submarine boys to look inside. "Really, fellows," he said, "I'm beginning to get just a bit fascinated with the idea, I'll admit. Quite a tidy sum already, what?" As the bank circulated from hand to hand, the submarine boys discovered that it contained, besides a pleasing amount in small change, several banknotes. "What's the scheme?" asked Lieutenant Jack. "How do you work it?" "This is the idea Jones outlined to me," Ned White went on. "The first week I was to put a penny in the bank, the second week 2 cents, the third week 4 cents, the fourth week 8 cents, and so on. You catch the idea? Each week I put in double what I did the week before. In other words, I double the bet every week." "How long do you keep this up?" asked Hal, who possessed an excellent head for mathematics. "For 6 months. 26 weeks," Ned answered. "At the end of 26 weeks, then, putting by money on that plan, you'll have quite a tidy sum," Hal suggested. "Very tidy, I expect," White agreed. "When I get it all saved, I'm going to convert the money into a draft and send it to my father as a little gift. He'll be pleased to see that I really am saving money, even if only in a small way." "How long have you been saving on this plan?" Jack asked. "I put in the money for the 15th week yesterday," Ned replied. "It has only 11 weeks more to run." "And how much money do you expect to have saved when the 26 weeks are ended?" Hal pursued. "Oh, I haven't the least idea," Ned admitted. "I never was any good at arithmetic. 11 weeks more won't be long to wait, and then I'll count up what I've saved. It will be the last few weeks of the game that will draw hardest on you," Hastings suggested as he reached for paper and pencil. "I expect so," White assented. Ensign Hal began to figure. At last he had the sum calculated. "Unless your father is a very rich man," Hal remarked, "he'll appreciate your intended gift very highly." "Will he?" "Yes. I've just got the result figured out for the total savings for 26 weeks on your plan of starting with a cent and each week doubling what it was the week before. It's a very tidy sum." "Is it?" Ned inquired. "In a general way, how much?" "Pretty close to $750,000,000," said Hal dryly, as he passed over the sheet containing the figures. "What?" gasped Ned White. "Stop trifling with my intellect. Are those figures straight?" "As straight as I know how to make them," Hastings declared gravely. "Hal is the best mathematician in our crowd," Jack Benson added. Ned White appeared thunderstruck. He stared at the figures with vacant eyes. "Almost $750,000,000," he gasped. "Wow! A glass of water or throw it over me. I'm faint." At least he appeared weak, for Ned White sank back into his chair, still clutching the paper and staring at Hal's figures. "Great results sometimes come from very small beginnings, you know," Eph broke in. "But 3/4—" Then Ned's face turned red. "Say," he gasped, "do you suppose Jonesy knew what I was up against?" "Probably," nodded Hal, "if he's any good at arithmetic. This kind of scheme is what is known as an example of geometrical progression. During the first weeks of the 26 the saving is very easy, but the last weeks would be impossible to any but a rich man." "And even the Bank of England couldn't keep up that game of savings for a year, could it?" demanded Ned, bewildered. "I doubt if all the people in the world could raise the money to keep up that game for a year," Hal answered. "I haven't any idea yet how much money one would have saved at the end of a whole year, but I'll figure it out now." "Don't," begged Ned sharply. "Don't do anything of the sort unless you want to see me an accepted candidate for a lunatic asylum. Young Mr. White's face bore such an odd expression of mingled rage and sheepishness that the submarine boys could no longer hold back their laughter. Indeed, they appeared to be the victims of 3 separate and various fits. "That's right," growled Ned. "Laugh at me. Enjoy me as one of the prize idiots of the United States. But, oh, you Jonesy, just wait until I get back to Washington and behold your smirking face. What won't I do to you? I'll apply for a whole month's leave and spend all that extra time in trying to think up picturesque ways of putting it all over Jones for making such a fool of me. And then when you get back to Washington," chuckled Ensign Eph, "you'll raise a goodly sum of money and hand it all over to one Jones as a bribe to keep him from telling everyone else in the State Department about your savings." "It'll be too late," muttered White, opening his eyes still wider. "That miserable Jones has doubtless told everyone in the department already. And for that matter, I told a few myself before I came away. Oh. Now, as you fellows won't do anything for me, I'll have to do it for myself." Rising and crossing the wardroom, Ned bumped his head repeatedly, though with some caution, against the steel wall. Returning, Ned bent over the bank, transferring all of his recent savings to his pockets. "Want to come up on deck and see me throw this beastly bank overboard?" he demanded. All 3 shook their heads. "Tell you what we'll do," Ned White continued. "We'll go on shore this evening and spend all this trash that has accumulated so far." "We won't even think of it," retorted Jack. "Mr. White, do go right on with your savings. Keep it up for the full 26 weeks or as long as you can go on. It'll teach you a lot about the value of hoarding money." Ned's only reply was a snort as he hurried to the deck, where he hurled his now empty bank as far as he could throw it. "No more little kid tricks for me," White declared as he re-entered the wardroom. "It strikes me that the game you've just abandoned was a full-sized man's performance." Ensign Eph chuckled. "Please don't say any more," urged Ned miserably. "If you do, I'm afraid I'll forget my place as a guest but just wait until I get my hands on that fellow Jones." Jack Benson shot a warning glance at Eph Somers. After that, Ned was teased no more about his get-rich-quickly scheme. Dinner went off pleasantly that evening. Later, Jack drew Hal aside and led him up to the deck. "I want you to stay here," Jack explained, "and keep the sharpest lookout every second of the time. You see a masthead light on the Velvet? If that light should be hauled down, or if she moves out of the bay under it, I want you to let me know instantly." "I understand," Hal nodded. "The rest of us may come up on deck, and probably will," Benson continued, "but if we do, you are on watch just the same, though you do not need to let anyone else see it." Half an hour later, all of the wardroom crowd occupied chairs under the little awning. Though Hal joined them, he seated himself so that not once was his face turned away from the Velvet. "When are you going out to sea, or under the sea, or to do something picturesque?" Ned asked Jack. "It's really hard to say," Benson replied. "Then you don't know at present what you're going to do?" "If I did know, it would be highly improper for me to tell anyone else." "Oh, I beg your pardon," Ned went on hurriedly, "but if I happen to be on shore when you start seaward, can you notify me so that I can get out here?" "Certainly, if there be time enough left to send and get you." By 10 o'clock Ned began to gap. "Anyone going below to bed?" he inquired. A little nap will come handy to me," Eph admitted. "I go on deck duty at midnight." Just then Hal Hastings gave the young commander's arm a warning pressure. Instantly Jack Benson wheeled about. The Velvet was just slipping from her pier, her masthead light going, when someone, presumably Jake, was hanging the sidelights in place. "Better remain on deck a little longer, Mr. White," Jack suggested. "What's the matter? Are you going to be lonely for company?" "In a few minutes," murmured Jack, "I'm going to give the signal for the assembling of all hands. You'll see how quickly sailors can tumble out under such conditions." "I'm on," nodded Ned, who really thought he was on, and sank back into his chair. Eph went back into the tower, where he stood watching the schooner's moving masthead light. Jack waited until the masthead light was fully 2 miles out at sea. Then he turned to his guest to remark quietly: "I may go further, Mr. White, and be able to show you a little drill in handling the boat." "Going to dive?" asked White eagerly. "Who can say?" smiled Jack quizzically. Chapter 15. Recording by John Brandon.